My husband Brandon and I were married in 2007 at the ages of 18 and 21, and he was stationed in the Air Force in Montana, where we moved after we were married, while both of our families were in Arizona. We were both raised in the church and claimed to have the identity of a Christian, but wasn't an active, growing relationship with God. Just after our first wedding anniversary, I was 36 weeks pregnant with our first, and Brandon was diagnosed with leukemia. We were young and naive about anything cancer related, but with all hope in me, I asked the doctor what the chances were of him going into remission after the first round of chemo, and the doctor chuckled at me and said that would take an act of God. After spending a month in the hospital and having been treated for 14 days straight of round-the-clock chemo, Brandon's bone marrow came back clear and was declared to be in remission, and he was released the same day that I was discharged after having our baby. I look back at that time and know that God had a covering over us, a covering of protection and a covering of peace that only He could give. We had a good friend reach out to his church, and word spread around about us, and the next day they had a list of people signed up to sit outside of our hospital room around the clock praying for us. It was those prayers that carried us through. They carried us through as I sat next to my husband as he sobbed into me saying how he wanted to be able to see his son grow up. They carried me through as I should have been nesting and preparing for our baby, but instead I was shaving my husband's head. I truly understand that peace that surpasses all understanding because I felt it. We were told that his relapse rate greatly decreased after 5 years, but also that because of chemo, the chances were greater for him developing another form of cancer. And that's when the seed of fear was planted, and the enemy knew it. When Brandon was diagnosed, it was only because I took him to the ER for a high fever, something that another doctor said was probably just the flu. So every headache, fever, or growing pains, and even the kids triggered an overwhelming amount of fear, crippling fear. In 2016, we found out that we were pregnant with our fourth baby, and just like I never thought about cancer happening to us, the thought of miscarriage never crossed my mind until it happened. I grieved in a way that I had never had before. It took me almost a year to trust the process again, but unfortunately we suffered 2 more losses in 2017. In February 2018, after a routine dermatology appointment, we got the call that we had dreaded. The cloud of fear that had been looming over us for the past 8 years was now pouring down. Brandon was diagnosed with stage 2 melanoma and needed to have an immediate surgery to remove it and also take a couple lymph nodes to see if it had spread to them as well and would be considered stage 3. This time around, as we waited for the biopsy results, I was not as peaceful. I had 3 little kids, and it was a minute-by-minute battle to take every thought captive and not dwell on the idea of possibly becoming a widow again. The reality was so much more evident this time. So many prayers of asking why, again, why us? But then He would drop little reminders in my spirit that He had done the impossible once and that He could do it again. And slowly, reminder after reminder, His promises of peace and faithfulness and goodness were being restored. That my fear was not from Him, but from the enemy, and that I needed to take back my ground. I remember at the time, my relationship with God, I was not confident in knowing if things were just a coincidence or if it was Him speaking to me, but I found a written down memory where I had said that I had never been more confident in knowing that I was hearing from Him in little ways. I felt seen by Him. I felt His promises that no matter how He decided to heal Brandon, whether earthly or heavenly, He had me in the palm of His hand. Thankfully, the biopsy came back negative and it had not spread past the area of surgery. 2 months later, after 3 losses, we were expecting again and stayed cautiously hopeful. For many weeks to come, I was paralyzed with fear, expecting to find signs of miscarriage every time I went to the bathroom. I could barely function, let alone homeschool my other kids, which led to me feeling like a failure, and mild depression. I was so blessed at the time to have a friend speak life into this pregnancy for me, that this baby was a promise fulfilled, and she had every confidence God was going to use this baby for mighty things. Little by little, I started to take back the joy the enemy had stole from me. And while I'd like to say that I didn't struggle with fear anymore, I definitely did. Right up even until the day that he was born, I was convinced something was going to go wrong. And praise God, we got a healthy rainbow baby, which stands for God's rainbow after the storm. But just like with Brandon's journey, it was a day by day, sometimes minute by minute surrender. In John 14:27, it says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give it to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." Trusting and knowing that no matter how painful the path is, God's way is always better than ours. That he hasn't given us a spirit of fear, and that whenever those thoughts come, all we have to do is just say his name.